Alright, so I'll read you guys the first chapter. Might as well turn off the music. No need for music in here. No need for music. For this chapter. But I'll read you the first chapter, maybe two. Who knows? I like the first two chapters. Alright. Forgive me if I'm a goof about it. Are we writing erotica tonight? Yeah. Chapter 1. Acknowledgement. She almost died, Jerry. I know, but what do you want me to do? Take her keys and keep her locked up in the house? I'm not saying that. Don't put words in my mouth. I could barely understand the shouting around me. I couldn't even move without feeling something tug in different parts of my skin. My vision, hazy from some sort of anesthesia aftermath, made shapes and colors and slowly tried to carve out details. Still, I was as lost as I could possibly be. Where was I? And what had happened to me? I remained still and recollected everything I could. My name was Maya Augustine. I was a 25-year-old online blogger who was paid to write about food trends and recipe opinions. I lived with my dad, Jerry, who worked extremely hard at his mom-and-pop auto shop. My mother, Sarah, on the other hand, climbed up a steep corporate business ladder and was now the head of human relations at her office. Compared to most of my friends, I was one of the lucky ones to have both parents in my life and together. Yet, I kept hearing their voices bounce back and forth with anger. Did I do something wrong? They barely ever fought, at least in front of me. They never raised their voices. What was different now? I had to remember what happened before I ended up here. Are you sure you're going to be okay? I can come with if you want. My dad was always worried about me. I was more or less a shut-in, electing to only go out if absolutely necessary due to not really caring for crowds and living my best life working from home. That day was one of those days I needed to see through outside of my office. I was tasked with reviewing and writing about a very complex curry recipe that was said to be flavorful, but not spicy, which, in itself, was hard to believe. There were so many ingredients in the roux itself that I knew a good quarter of the spices I needed I had to import by. Still, I was 25. I knew I could handle a grocery store run on my own. I had done so just fine before, or else my business would have failed long ago. I'll be fine. It's just a trip to the grocery store for spices. I think I can handle that much, I replied reassuringly. He didn't look like it, but my dad was a major worrywart when it came to me. Even when I was a kid, he would protect me from anything he could because I was his little girl. He tried to sway me away from going out with friends, seeing sports games or shows my school put on, and even had to be convinced by my mother to let me go to prom. I often thought my love for staying indoors spawned from his overprotection of me, but it wasn't a negative blame by any means. After all, I was safe, and he didn't lock me away like some tower princess, bound to never see the outside world. My dad sighed and stood from the dining room table, walking away from the bills he was counting off to hug me gently. I know, but I'm always going to worry about you no matter what. 'Cause I'm your little girl, I know. I love you. And I'll be home soon, okay? I love you too. He was sweet, waving me off as I walked out the door towards my old ride. I had a pretty crappy car, but it was a car that served me well ever since I got it at 16. That car got me to high school, college, and back home with only an oil change and a light repair needed to keep it running. Maybe it was my bare usage of it that kept it alive, or maybe my dad had maintained maintenance on it in secret from time to time. I would never truly know. Hold on, pardon me as I get a little towel around me. It's a little, like, I just want to get comfy. I hopped into my car and slowly drove off to the nearest international grocery store in town, which was luckily about 15 minutes out towards the city. I lived in the beautiful northern suburbs where the hustle of urban life calmed to a steady, negotiable beat. Towel? You mean no, towel. Like, I'm sweaty. I'm sweaty. I meant towel. That, by the way, that's not part of the book. Back to the book. I went through the list in my head of everything I needed, tapping my phone resting in the cup holder in habit to check off each item I remembered. My eyes were glued to the road, making sure I was taking every precaution to get from point A to B and back without an incident. When I arrived, I was relieved to see that not many people were thinking about shopping at the same time I was. That meant less chance of random Karens ruining the mood for everyone. Thank God. Even parking with 2 empty spaces on each side of me made me sigh out loud in contentment as I exited my car. Taking a grocery basket and nestling it in the crook of my elbow, I made a beeline toward the spice aisle. It was daunting as hell to see more spices than you could imagine lining a wall, but when you have a list in your head and the spices are in alphabetical order, thanks to the labor of the store stock employees, things just safely fall into place. The collection then becomes a smooth conveyor belt with my hand going from the shelf to the basket, with something becoming scratched off my mental list. What stopped it was a hand softly bumping against my knuckles, causing me to drop the bottle of ground fennel I had almost wrapped my fingers around. "Oh shit!" I gasped out, reaching out to catch the falling bottle with both hands. Despite my clumsy release of it, I managed to catch and cradle the bottle in my palms. However, a large hand was nestled between both of mine as a secondary support, while another was softly laid against my upper back. 1 second, I was relieved that I caught the bottle. The next, I froze in mild fear. Who was touching me? I quickly looked over to meet the gaze of a rather handsome gentleman, staring at my hands in worry. The 3rd second that passed had me falling mentally into his soft jade eyes. How could a set of eyes look so gem-like? He wasn't looking at my gaze, as he kept his focus down at the mini-rescue mission in our hands. But I couldn't pull myself away from staring into his eyes. The 4th second had him finally meeting my stare, his expression melting from worry to soft concern with a smile. The 5th filled my ears with his voice. "Are you okay? I didn't mean to scare you." I was at a loss for words. My life was devoted to writing and expressing my thoughts and feelings publicly and proudly, but I could not speak a single word in reply. Was it due to my surprise or my confusion of the situation? My mind was spinning slightly, even as he gently pushed his hand up against mine and guided me to stand up straight. After I let in a breath, I slowly let myself mentally center and nodded to the stranger. As I did, he released my hands and removed his other hand from my back, taking a step back from me in understanding. "Sorry about that," I mumbled in embarrassment. "I guess I just got into my own head and wasn't paying attention." I looked up to the stranger again to see him chuckle and brush a couple of strands of black hair from his hairline. It gave me a chance to look at his entirety and note his black sneakers, simple dark jeans, brandless zip-up hoodie, and a t-shirt of a band I didn't recognize. He was a typical stranger. Yet something made him stick out to me. Had I seen him somewhere before? Whatever. It was just a stranger. He nodded back to me and looked to the shelves, obviously looking for something. "I feel that. No worries, okay?" I nodded, and that was that. He reached up and took hold of a bottle of fenugreek powder before stepping back and walking around me out of the aisle. I let my mind linger on him for a bit longer, trying to pin down his appearance with anyone I had seen before, and swearing there was a reason I recognized him briefly. After a moment, I shook my head and resumed my gathering of spices before going to collect other ingredients for my curry review. I walked out of the grocery store $50 lighter, but I knew my work would replenish the expenses over time. I loaded the 3 bags I carried out to the backseat of my car before stepping into the driver's seat and driving out of the parking lot towards home. I went through the setup in my head, knowing that curry was temperamental, despite it just being a spice mix turned sauce. I swore the light was red. As I approached an intersection, I knew I had seen a red light and immediately pinned the color to the potential angry emoji I'd have to use if the curry failed. I guess I really got into my head, not noticing a large vehicle that would suddenly crash into the back of my little car, causing me to quickly skid forward to the middle of the street. I felt my skull and brain shake as the side of my head collided with my steering wheel. But immediately after, all I could see was black. I could softly hear the sound of car horns and police sirens all around me, muffled by my dizzying mind. I knew someone had taken hold of me and dragged me out of my car, but I couldn't recall any other details beyond that. It took me all of that recall to realize I was in the hospital, covered in IVs and bandages from a car crash I didn't even cause. I was so careful. And yet I was there, injured with a fuzzy memory. The shouting match was all I heard around me, barely softening the sounds of the heart monitor's incessant beeping signifying my life. At last, I slowly opened my eyes and took in the bright light of the hospital room I was in. I was right. I was laid on a hospital bed with my parents shouting back and forth over me. I could only let out a groan, signaling them to stop. I needed quiet. My jaw was too sore to form words. Maya! My mother gasped before dropping down to her knees beside me and taking my hand in both of hers. Thank God you're awake. My father said nothing and gripped my other hand, staring down at it with gritted teeth. I could tell both of them were frustrated, but all that mattered to them was that I had opened my eyes. I took the sight of both of them in, letting out a small sigh of my own before forcing myself to speak. What happened? I mumbled, barely moving my lips. My mom grimaced and placed her forehead against my hand while my dad shook his head. Some car thief tried to speed through a light while getting chased by the cops. You were in the way and ended up in a crash, my dad confessed, squeezing my hand softly. It stopped the thief, and he's been arrested, but... I'm sorry, I should have gone with you. I was at a loss once again. This time, my mind was saying a million things, but I physically couldn't say them aloud. I was so careful. And yet, a knock on the room door captured our attention, making the three of us in the room stare at the entrance. A muffled voice echoed from behind the wood, barely audible enough to hear. My dad, however, had amazing hearing. Come in. The door slowly swung open, revealing a nurse motioning someone out of sight to enter. My brain suddenly fell silent as the stranger I had met before walked into the room with a bouquet of assorted flowers. Him? Why was he here? My dad took a step forward, holding a hand over me in some form of protection, while my mother pinned her eyes on him, standing up slowly. I'm sorry to disturb you, but... Wait. The stranger began to say before looking at me and letting recognition paint over his face. You're the woman I bumped into at the grocery store. I could barely nod in confirmation, surprised myself to see him in the room, much less with flowers. Who are you? My dad asked, taking another firm step forward. The stranger shook his head and held out the flowers as a gesture of some kind. I'm the owner of the car you helped stop the thief from taking. I know it's not a lot, but I wanted to say thank you somehow. When my dad didn't step forward to take the bouquet, the stranger made his way towards my mother and handed her the flowers. She took them and placed them on the nearby table before turning back to the stranger in some form of awe. Did she know him? The stranger continued. Also, please know that I'll cover any and all hospital expenses, so don't worry. You can do that? My father asked, a hint of skepticism in his voice. It was fair. Hospital bills were not small by any means. The stranger looked like an average Joe. How was he going to cover everything? Suddenly, my mom practically hissed. Jerry, please! I was stunned. Why was she so hostile all of a sudden? My dad stared incredulously at as my mom cleared her throat and walked over with a smile. Thank you kindly, Mr. Hunter. We really appreciate it. Hunter. The name, the face, my mom's sudden business behavior. It suddenly clicked. The company my mom worked for was created and owned by Liam Hunter. He was a genius in terms of technology and business, placing stock in new ingenuity and betting his mind on projects meant to change the technological world. Many companies begged him to work for them, but he started his own business from literally three-digit numbers in his bank account. Blogs raved about him. He was praised for his intellect, his drive for future technologies, and his ridiculous charm that captured the heart of every male chaser alive. His face was plastered all over social media and news outlets for being part of Forbes' 30 Under 30 list, as well as being a candidate for America's top 20 most handsome men. And he was the guy I bumped into at a random grocery store? In the spice aisle, no less? I could only gawk in surprise at Liam, assuming he was indeed the Liam I was thinking of. My dad did the same, now understanding that this man, indeed, could cover the hospital expenses needed. Another knock at the door caused everyone in the room to look over, seeing a nurse quickly let herself in. Excuse me, the doctor would like to speak to both of you now? I can read. The doctor would like to speak to the both of you, Mr. and Mrs. Augustine. It's just about Maya's eventual release. Both of my parents looked at each other and nodded in mutual understanding before excusing themselves from the room with the nurse. I was then alone with Liam, unable to speak and still lost in the fact that I had just met a famous figure and stopped a criminal from stealing his car. It was at the expense of mine, but at the end of the day, a crime was stopped, right? Liam smiled at me and walked over to my side, reaching into his pocket and pulling out his wallet. I watched as he pulled out a small, partially transparent business card and placed it on the table next to the flowers. Maya, right? I know you can't speak right now, or else you probably already would have. If there's anything else I can do to repay you, please give me a call, okay? Just mention your name and whatever you need or want is yours, Liam said with a smile. I was flattered to know that he seemed to be in my debt in some way, but he was already paying for my hospital bills. I didn't want to look a gift horse in the mouth, but it was perplexing to imagine being so grateful that one would offer whatever I needed in exchange. I slowly formed a smile of my own in return, causing Liam, for some reason, to stare at me for a moment. I could tell something clicked in his brain, but seconds later he simply chuckled and shook his head. Liam then turned and made his way to the door, only stopping at the entrance to look back at me and say, "Get well soon, Maya." Something inside me begged to learn more about him. Some strange, childlike curiosity prodded my mind in need. He had suddenly come into my life and offered me something absolutely powerful. How powerful was this seemingly unlimited wish? Were there any hidden limitations that I would learn about later? How would this man get certain things if I asked for unobtainable things? Liam clung to my mind for my entire hospital stay. I barely remembered to post about my hospital stay on my blog, lost in simply researching Mr. Hunter when I was able to get my hands on my laptop. My followers were sympathetic, and my sponsors were more than understanding for my delay on the Curry review. But 90% of my browser tabs consisted of tabloids and news articles. I just needed to know more before I obtained my unlimited wish. And that's the first chapter, guys. What do you think? Just from the first chapter, what do you think? Well, I shove a straw into this Kool-Aid jammer. I'm writing erotica. Let me go get my Kool-Aid jammer.